Hi, my name is Anna Williams. And so, after watching all of Spike Lee's movies that we were assigned, I came to appreciate his style and just all the movies that he produced, and I thought they were really interesting. And I kind of heard of all of them before, but I just never really made myself watch them, so I'm glad that I got the opportunity to. And so, I started by watching Do the Right Thing, and my first impressions of it were that it was kind of not all over the place, but just very intense when there was action, and it took place on a very hot summer, so it kind of created tension in the air, and on top of racial tensions, and Spike Lee played Mookie, and he was sort of in the middle the whole time, between Sal and the brothers and the rest of the community, and it was his reason for staying was so that he could still support himself without having to quit and leave it behind, because he worked there for a while. And the frustration in the community was that there were no black people on the Wall of Fame. It was all white people, even though there were plenty of eligible candidates that were black that should have been on that wall. And that was sort of what took place the whole movie. And it was shot in 1989, and it was sort of a drama / comedy, and it took place in Brooklyn, New York. And so through watching the movie, I noticed a few common themes, and that was sort of, well, the heat and a red and orange vibe in a way that was relevant throughout the whole movie. And I saw that it had a $6 million budget, and it was a commercial success. And Spike Lee used historical events to kind of inspire him to write this, such as Howard Beach, the racial incident, and the shooting of Eleanor Bumpin by police. And so, just by watching the movie, I sort of empathized with Mookie's character, because he was sort of stuck in the middle, but I understood the frustration of Radio Raheem and everyone else, and it sort of built up. He was constantly having to deal with everything, and then when Sal said they had their best day and forever, that's when everything sort of bubbled up, when everyone came in the shop before they were about to close, and then tensions just boiled over. And that scene was very intense, especially as Sal kept spewing the N-word at all of them, and it was just very intense, and it made me really uncomfortable. And so then everyone turned on each other, and I thought Spike Lee did a really good job of creating that tension and it rising, and then it got taken out into the street. And then eventually when the police got there, the unfortunate incident of Radio Raheem being strangled to death, and I just wanted it not to happen so bad, but in a way it seemed like it sort of had to, so that everyone understood the problem at hand and the racial injustices that existed in New York at that time. And I thought it was really powerful when Mookie took the trash can and threw it at Sal's, and it sort of rallied everyone up and just showed the frustration that they all were dealing with. And then when the Chinese grocery store across the street, when they were about to turn on them, and his plea, we're just like you, we aren't normal in America, I thought that scene was pretty powerful too. And yeah, I liked the movie overall. I thought that it had a certain style to it that I saw in Malcolm X and the 25th Hour. And I thought the ending was really powerful when Spike Lee sort of juxtaposed Malcolm X and Martin Luther King using their quotes, and obviously they were both very important to the civil rights movement and everything. And I thought that it was a powerful ending because the movie seemed like it was just one specific incident, but then the ending made it a full circle moment and showed that it really impacts everyone, and how this was just another incident of why change was needed in America for racial rights and everything. And so after I watched Do the Right Thing, I moved on to watch Malcolm X. And at first I was a little intimidated because it was 3.5 hours long, but I thought even it needed to be that long to really showcase Malcolm X's whole life and the evolution that he like sort of became a man at the end. And so it was shot in 1992 and it was a biographical drama, and it was directed and co-written by Spike Lee and had a budget of 35 million. And so that was just sort of the background information I looked into. And when I was researching it, just to get a little more background after I watched the movie, I thought there were a lot of like really interesting like backgrounds to the making of the actual movie, because that wasn't covered in the movie. They didn't talk about who was going to direct it, who was going to play who, but that was just really interesting on its own. And so I kind of felt like the movie was divided up into like a few different parts. Like it showed his childhood and that was shown in flashbacks, and I thought the flashback scenes were really strong and sort of stuck with Spike Lee's theme of like being very intense and to get the point across. Like there didn't have to be a lot of words, but the actions and like the overall mood spoke for itself. Like when his childhood house was on fire, and then when eventually Malcolm X's own house with his own children had the same fate, and it just shows how he dealt with it. And so I was kind of confused at first because I didn't really know much about Malcolm X, and I thought that the whole movie was just going to be about him being a leader in like the Nation of Islam and just would follow that whole adventure, but I didn't realize that he had such a like deep background and like everything made him who he was. And so I was sort of like he's not like the best guy. Like he was a criminal, he was tricking people, and then when he got sentenced, it angered me that the women only got like, forget how long, it was like 2 months or 2 years or something, and Malcolm and his like accomplice got 8 to 10 years just to make an example out of them because they were sleeping with white women. And then his time in jail, I sort of like rooted for him. I wanted him to like make like realize that he needed to like move on in a better way, because he seriously seemed to have like this built up tension inside of him and like anger towards others. And I thought that Denzel Washington did a really good job of like conveying that like built up emotion. And then when he finally met Elijah Muhammad and sort of started that journey, I noticed the turnaround. But he was obviously like very extreme with his beliefs and his statements to the press. And it was interesting to sort of watch the power struggle throughout the movie. And like at first he was on like a steady incline, but then they realized how much power he actually had, and he sort of got more intense with his remarks to the press, and especially after his comments about JFK. That was really like intense, and no one really liked that. But then when he finally made the pilgrimage to Mecca, he sort of like reevaluated his views on race, because before he was very like anti-white, but after he realized that people can have common beliefs and like morals despite their race, it sort of humbled him, I think, and made his views less intense. But at this point it was already like too far gone. He had a lot of enemies, and I thought the scene where he had to leave his home and stay in a hotel, but him and his wife were both constantly being bombarded with phone calls threatening his life. And it just kind of showed how like it was kind of just inevitable at this point that he had too many enemies. And although he stood for a good cause, sometimes people just can't see past that and wanted to take their anger out on him. And I knew previously that he obviously had been assassinated, but I didn't know how it really took place. And I thought the scene did a really good job of like conveying the like this how unexpected and like unprepared he was at the moment, even though like the signs were there, and just the how chaotic the atmosphere was, and it just really made me empathize with him because he did not deserve that to be assassinated just for standing up for what he believed in. And then I thought the ending was a nice full circle moment with Nelson Mandela like quoting Malcolm and teaching it to young kids. And so I was content overall with the movie, and it sort of had things in common with Do the Right Thing, how like it just takes one person to stick up for something, and it can just like pivot the people and stand up for what they believed in. And I thought that was really interesting. And then finally, I ended with The 25th Hour, that was directed by Spike Lee in 2002. It was a drama and crime, and it followed Monty Brogan in New York City after 9/11, and he was sentenced to 7 years for dealing drugs, and it just sort of documented his journey and everything, and it was like his last 24 hours of freedom, and it had a $5 million budget. And although I thought it was like sort of the most modern out of the three movies, which obviously it was the most recent, I really enjoyed Malcolm X and Do the Right Thing because it was just sort of something I wouldn't normally watch on my own. And so I'm glad that we had the opportunity to watch it and analyze it. And I have a lot of respect for Spike Lee as a director and just a person in general. And yeah, thank you.